The late 2000s and early 2010s brought us an unending barrage of zombie media, from movies to TV shows to video games. It was everywhere. You couldn't escape it even if you tried.
Hey Joe, you wanna play a zombie game?
Yeah!
Hey Joe, you wanna play a zombie game?
Sure!
Hey Joe, you wanna play a zombie game?
Oh, okay.
Hey Joe, you wanna play a zombie game?
No, I don't want to fucking play another goddamn zombie game!
It was also during this period that another barrage struck, the Xbox Indie Marketplace, a store that, while having many classics, also had, well, trash. Which is where these two topics correlate, because in the midst of all that came a little mod called DayZ. DayZ originally came from a modded version of Arma 2, set in a vast open map filled with zombies, players, and loot. It was ripe for interesting PvP and roleplay. Plenty of big YouTubers at the time played it, and eventually it would get its own solo version, which to this day is still popular. This video, though, is not about DayZ, but its clone, a poorly made, albeit fun game called ApocZ, which was released on March 25th, 2014 for $1 on the Xbox Live Indie Store. And hey, for a price like that, just about anything goes. The game was developed by Sick Creations with a K, and it's always a good sign when your company sounds like it belongs in one of those "ApocZ my game to be here" shirts. They released several other games, including Aliens vs. Romans, KGB Episode 1, Toy Plane, End of Days Survivor, End of Days Infected vs. Mercs, The Keep, Nuclear Wasteland 2030, and of course saving the best for last, ApocZ. If you've never heard of these games before, don't worry, you didn't miss out on much. They're all shovelware and probably best left forgotten. Excluding ApocZ, of course, because that's the only one I played, and hey, nostalgia is king. ApocZ takes place in a post-apocalyptic Ukraine, where in the northern Black Sea, and hell has broken loose. It's an open world and takes place in first person, with up to 16 players for PvE and PvP combat. You'll spend most of your time looting the tiny map for guns, food, water, and whatever other goodies you can find. There are vehicles to help you traverse, and tents used to save loot for other servers. If this sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's just DayZ, basically. It was a big thing during this time for more popular PC games to get a knockoff Xbox version. The best example of this would of course be Castle Miner Z, which was made to capitalize on the huge Minecraft trend at the time. And just like Castle Miner Z and every other knockoff game, there isn't a lot to it. Take for example ApocZ's map to DayZ's. It's like a studio apartment next to a mansion. You could easily see the whole map in a couple minutes, and there just wasn't much to the game at all. Once you've had your fill of looting and killing the 2,000 zombies that populate the map in every spawn, that's it. Congratulations, you've played all there is. DayZ may have its own issues, of course, and it can be very boring at times, especially as you'll walk for 30 minutes in the woods, but it also had the benefit of pretty intense PvP and rather strange interactions with players, which usually made up for it. But ApocZ didn't have that. It was buggy, and the gameplay was sort of bad, and it had terrible graphics, and from what I remember, sort of weak and floaty controls, which led to PvP being funny and not tense, though, to be honest, that's what in the end gave the game its charm. It was a comically cheap, buggy mess, and you could play it with your friends, and it was the closest thing to DayZ that the Xbox 360 ever had. And like I said before, for $1, it provided much more fun than it ever should have. As with everything though, the good times don't last forever. Eventually, the Xbox Indie Marketplace shut down, and going with it a massive piece of indie gaming history, and of course, ApocZ. While I was writing this, I was under the assumption that it could not be downloaded again, but apparently you can through some different method. I'm not sure on the details, as I no longer have access to a 360, but thankfully it still can be downloaded, but it cannot be emulated, at least not in a reliable state, so if you wanted it to be like me and try to play it on PC, you're out of luck. So this would probably be the part of the video where I say, that's it. This is ApocZ, the game that I remember, and so do some other people, but it's forgotten history. Except, well, there's more to this story. Yes, the game may have been finished off by the shutdown, but it wasn't the real reason for ApocZ's end. You see, the game had previously gone radio silent. Its last update was 1.2, which was in June of 2014. And as we can see by this website and forums and such, there was a fabled 1.3 version planned, which would have added proximity chat and fixed some bugs. But obviously it never came. So what happened? Well, at first the delays were just little things. There was a issue with the update that caused a game-breaking bug, and then later they had electrical issues at their office. Annoying things for sure, but nothing that would have ceased development on an update for years. Unfortunately, what happened next is rather serious though. The main developer, Kevin, got into a severe car crash, and while he did survive the crash, Kevin appeared to have been wheelchair bound for a pretty significant period of time. At one point, he even posted photos on the now gone Epoxy forum of his injured feet, but these links are long dead, so we cannot subject ourselves to whatever it was. Despite this rather severe crash though, Kevin did mention that he was still working on the new update, but of course it never came out. That was it. If you look at the official Epoxy website today, it still technically exists, but the forum is gone. It seems to have disappeared sometime in 2016, and the rest of the site is slow and the links don't work. The other website that I've been using for information for this video, Epoxy Guide, also hasn't been touched since early 2015. So it seems that for all intents and purposes, Epoxy was dead and done. So just like before, this would be the part of the video where I say that Epoxy is just another relic from a time when Xbox had tons of these strange little indie games. I'd wrap up the video with some nostalgia talk and we would all be done here. But once again, there is more to this story. Despite Epoxy seemingly being dormant for years, sometime in the past year or two, a game appeared on Steam called Epoxy. But it was different, as you can tell by these screenshots, compared to the original. At first, people seem to think that it was not made by the original creator Kevin, but as far as I can tell, this is him, and he appears to want to make Epoxy bigger and better than before, with a release window of late 2022 to mid 2023. And while I'm not super sure that's gonna happen, he is somewhat active on Steam, with comments from November of 2022, so he's still around, presumably trying to make this game. But this is not the original. This is a new game, which I'm not really sure a lot of people care about. There are comments on the Steam forum and on the Reddit that have expressed interest in having the original for sale on Steam, and not this new one. Unfortunately, it appears that Kevin has sort of dismissed this, and I would imagine we're just never going to get the original back, which is a shame. He could have saved a game from being potentially lost, and also made himself a few bucks. There are also accusations of the new Epoxy game being an asset flip that was originally some sort of battle royale game, which, while of course I can't confirm to be true, it is an interesting theory. Because when you examine the screenshots on the Steam page, there's not a zombie in sight, which could just be a mistake that he made, but sorta weird. All this has caused enough of a stir in the incredibly active Epoxy community that some fans banded together and were apparently going to work on their own version of the game, which was more in line with the original. Unfortunately, this fell through. I have no idea why or what happened, but 3 of the main people working on it left, leaving only one guy who is supposedly looking for another dev team, but there's really not a lot of information on this, with most of it coming from this Discord server. And all that brings us to the present, with Epoxy Remake seemingly slow and possibly dead in the water, and the new Epoxy seemingly unfinished for now. It seems that the only way to ever play Epoxy will be on the 360. It's a real shame. We can only hope that Kevin changes his mind or someone figures out how to run it on an emulator, because I think this game does deserve to be remembered. It's perfectly emblematic of that weird period of Xbox indie games where it was just silly, random, sort of trashy stuff. And it was really fun. It was almost like the Wild West of games marketplace stuff. It was really fun. And also, they wouldn't be setting a precedent by putting this game on Steam. Castle Miner Z is available on Steam and has been for many years at this point. So it wouldn't be entirely out of the question for him to do this. He would just have to choose to. But that's it. This was the story of the forgotten DayZ clone, a game that I and many others had a lot of fun with. If you like the video, subscribe, I guess. I don't know, it's up to you.
Bro said he paused his game to be here.